Jun-Ho sat in his sleek office, rubbing his temples as he glanced at the schedule for the day. Ever since Amara started her internship, his daily routine had been disrupted by her presence. She wasn't incompetent, that was the annoying part. In fact, she was smart, resourceful, and had a way of bringing fresh ideas into discussions. But she was also stubborn, challenging his decisions in meetings and refusing to be intimidated by his cold demeanor. And worst of all, she was always in his space. Still thinking about her? Jun-Ho looked up to see Mi-ho, his childhood best friend and the CEO of JH Tech, leaning casually against the doorframe. Jun-Ho scoffed. Thinking about who? Mi-ho smirked. The intern who spilled coffee on you. The same one you swore would be gone in a week, but now you won't fire. I have no reason to fire her, Jun-Ho muttered, returning to his work. She's competent. That's all. Mi-ho walked in and sat across from him. Right. And yet, I've never seen you this distracted before. You even rejected a dinner meeting with Director Park yesterday. That's not like you. Jun-Ho sighed, closing his laptop. I just didn't feel like going. Mi-ho grinned. Because she was there, wasn't she? Jun-Ho shot him an unimpressed look. You're ridiculous. Mi-ho leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. I'll make you a bet. Jun-Ho raised an eyebrow. A bet? Mi-ho nodded. I bet you'll fall for Amara within 3 months. Jun-Ho scoffed, leaning back in his chair. That's the most absurd thing I've ever heard. Is it? Mi-ho smirked. You're already paying attention to her. You've never been interested in any intern before. Jun-Ho shook his head. That's because no intern has ever been this much of a headache. Mi-ho chuckled. Keep telling yourself that. He extended a hand. 3 months. If you don't fall for her, I'll personally handle your boring quarterly reports for the rest of the year. Jun-Ho smirked. And if I do? Mi-ho grinned. Then you admit I was right, and you take her on a real date. Jun-Ho rolled his eyes, but shook Mi-ho's hand. Deal. But you're wasting your time. Unbeknownst to them, Amara stood just outside the office, holding a stack of reports. She had heard everything. Her grip on the papers tightened. A bet. Jun-Ho thought he was so above falling for her that he had to make a game out of it. We'll see about that, Mr. CEO. If he thought she would just play along, he had another thing coming. Amara stood frozen outside Jun-Ho's office, her fingers gripping the stack of reports so tightly that the edges crumpled. She had been working tirelessly at JH Tech, proving herself in meetings, staying late to complete projects, and pushing through the challenges of being in a foreign country. And yet, to Jun-Ho, this was just some kind of game. Her jaw clenched. Fine. If he thinks this is a joke, I'll show him just how wrong he is. Straining her shoulders, she took a deep breath, smoothed out the reports, and stepped into the office as if she had heard nothing. Mi-ho had just leaned back in his chair, clearly pleased with himself, when the door opened. Both men turned their heads as Amara walked in, her expression calm and unreadable. Excuse me, she said, her voice even. I have the latest reports for you, CEO Lee. Jun-Ho gave her a brief nod, gesturing for her to set them on his desk. Thank you. You can leave them there. She placed the documents down carefully, but before she turned to leave, her gaze flickered toward Mi-ho. "Good afternoon, Director Kong." Her tone was perfectly polite, but there was something in her eyes, something sharp, almost challenging. Mi-ho, ever perceptive, tilted his head slightly, studying her before responding. "Good afternoon, Amara." As she turned to leave, Jun-Ho barely paid attention, already flipping through the reports. But Mi-ho. His smirk faded ever so slightly as he watched Amara's retreating figure. The way she had walked in, poised, confident, gave him the feeling that she had overheard more than she let on. If Jun-Ho thought Amara would avoid him after their tense first few weeks, he was mistaken. Instead, she was everywhere. Not in an obvious, attention-seeking way. No, she was far too composed for that. But she suddenly became even more engaged at work, pushing her ideas forward with even more determination. In meetings, she challenged Jun-Ho's decisions without hesitation. At team lunches, she laughed easily with colleagues, never once looking in his direction. And when she interacted with Mi-ho, she was all polite smiles and sharp wit, as if daring him to say something. It was driving Jun-Ho insane. One evening, as Jun-Ho sat in his office, reviewing Amara's latest proposal, he realized something troubling. He wasn't just annoyed by her confidence. He was impressed. And maybe, just maybe, a little too interested. Meanwhile, Mi-ho watched with amusement. Sitting in the lounge, Mi-ho sipped his coffee, shaking his head as he scrolled through his messages. One from Jun-Ho stood out. "Jun-Ho, you're wrong. I'm not falling for her." Mi-ho chuckled, replying with a single message. "Mi-ho, sure. Keep telling yourself that." Because from what he was seeing, Jun-Ho was already losing the bet. And the best part? Amara knew it.